I've been a police officer in a mid-sized city in Pennsylvania for almost 15 years. Most days are predictable. Domestic disputes, bar fights, the occasional burglary. It's not glamorous and it's not usually dangerous. But every now and then, a call lands on your desk that clings to your soul for years. There's one case in particular that I can't shake. It's been nearly a decade and I still wake up some nights thinking about it. It wasn't the most violent case I've handled. Nobody died. Nobody even got seriously hurt. But it was deeply unsettling in a way that I still can't fully explain. And what's worse is that even after the trial, the arrest and the paperwork, I still don't understand why it all happened. It started with a missing persons report. It was late autumn, cold enough that your breath fogged in the air but not quite winter yet. A woman named Laura Kendall called to report that her younger sister, Rebecca, hadn't shown up to work for 2 days. At first, nobody was too alarmed. Rebecca was 24, single, and lived alone in a small apartment complex downtown. Maybe she'd taken off for a spontaneous trip. Maybe she was with a boyfriend. But Laura insisted that wasn't like her. Rebecca called her every single day, literally every day, and now she wasn't answering texts or calls. We did the usual welfare check the next morning. My partner and I drove out to the building, a drab 5-story structure that smelled faintly of mildew and cigarette smoke. Apartment 213, we knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Still nothing. We asked the landlord to open the door. He hesitated. Technically, we needed a warrant, but when we explained it was a welfare check for a possible missing person, he agreed. The first thing that hit us when we stepped inside was the smell. It wasn't the smell of decomposition, thank God, but it was wrong. Stale air, heavy with a sour metallic undertone. The apartment was neat, too neat. Rebecca's phone was charging on the counter. A half-empty cup of coffee sat on the table, long since cold. Her purse was hanging on a chair. Everything suggested she'd just stepped out for a moment and would be back any second, but she wasn't. We did a full sweep. Bathroom, bedroom, closet, nothing. No signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle. It was like she had simply vanished into thin air. 2 days later, the building manager called us back. This time it wasn't about Rebecca. It was about a man in 214. His name was Jeremy Lyons, mid-30s, worked nights as a security guard, lived alone, kept to himself. The other tenants described him as polite but weird, always wore long sleeves even in summer. Collected newspapers, hardly ever spoke. The manager said Jeremy had started doing strange things. First, he taped black garbage bags over all his windows. Then he stopped taking his trash out and piled it by the door. Neighbors reported hearing muffled conversations at odd hours of the night. Jeremy talking to someone even though he lived alone. We decided to talk to him. He opened the door on the first knock. He was thin, pale with deep circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in weeks. The apartment was dim, the only light coming from a small lamp in the corner. And there was that same sour metallic smell. "Mr. Lyons," I said, showing my badge. "We're following up on a missing person case. Your neighbor, Rebecca Kendall. Have you seen or heard anything unusual?" He blinked slowly. "Rebecca," he repeated. "No, I don't know her." That wasn't entirely unexpected. Neighbors often didn't know each other, but something about the way he said it felt off. Too deliberate. Too rehearsed. Then I noticed something behind him. On a small wooden table near the window sat a mug, identical to the ones in Rebecca's kitchen. I couldn't be sure, but it looked like the same brand and color. My gut told me it wasn't his. We didn't have probable cause to search the apartment, so we left. But I noted every detail in my report. 3 days later, Rebecca's car was found abandoned on the other side of town. Her keys were still in the ignition. The driver's seat was pushed far back, too far for someone her height. And there were scratch marks on the inside of the passenger door, as if someone had tried desperately to claw their way out. We were now treating it as a likely abduction. We canvassed the building again, interviewed every tenant. All of them said the same thing. Jeremy had been acting stranger and stranger. One woman swore she heard 2 people talking. In his apartment at 3 a.m., another said she saw him carrying a heavy duffel bag down the hallway around the time Rebecca disappeared. We applied for a search warrant. It was granted 2 days later. What we found in apartment 213 still gives me nightmares. It wasn't Rebecca. There was no body. But the place was a shrine, no other word for it. Every wall was covered with photographs of her. Some were clearly taken without her knowledge, at the grocery store, on the street, through her apartment window. Others were cutouts from her social media, printed and arranged meticulously. There were handwritten notes pinned beneath them. She looked at me today. She smiled when I walked by. She belongs here. In the center of the living room was a mannequin. It wore a blonde wig and Rebecca's favorite red dress, the same one she'd been wearing in one of the photos. And in the corner on a small table was a plate of food. It had long since rotted, crawling with flies. Jeremy wasn't home. He'd vanished. We launched a manhunt. His car was found abandoned 2 towns over. His bank accounts were untouched. His phone was off. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And then 6 months later, a hiker stumbled upon an old, half-collapsed hunting cabin deep in the woods 30 miles from the city. Inside, we found Jeremy Lyons. He was sitting in a chair, completely still, like he'd been waiting for us. His hair was longer, his beard unkempt, but he looked calm, almost relieved. And next to him, lying on a thin mattress, was Rebecca Kendall. She was alive. Barely. Malnourished, bruised, terrified, but alive. Jeremy didn't resist arrest. In fact, he thanked us as we handcuffed him. "She's safe now," he said. "I protected her. They would have hurt her out there." The story that came out during interrogation was both horrifying and bizarre. Jeremy had become obsessed with Rebecca months before her disappearance. He followed her daily, memorizing her schedule. He'd break into her apartment when she was at work, leaving small things behind. A flower on the table, a folded note in a drawer. He claimed he was making her feel safe. On the night she disappeared, he'd broken in again. But this time he waited. When she came home, he grabbed her, gagged her, and carried her to his car. He drove her out to the woods and kept her there, convinced he was saving her from a world that wanted to hurt her. For 6 months, she lived in that cabin. No phone, no light, no contact with the outside world. Just Jeremy and his delusional fantasy. The trial was a media circus. Jeremy pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The jury didn't buy it. He was convicted of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and multiple counts of stalking. He was sentenced to life without parole. Rebecca survived, but she moved across the country and changed her name. She doesn't talk to reporters. She doesn't do interviews. As for me, I still think about that apartment. The photographs, the mannequin, the plate of rotten food. I've seen violence. I've seen blood and bodies and brutality, but nothing has ever unsettled me like Jeremy Lyons. Because he wasn't a monster hiding in the shadows. He was quiet, ordinary. The kind of neighbor you wouldn't think twice about, and that's what keeps me up at night. Because people like Jeremy don't look dangerous. They don't feel dangerous until it's too late. I've been a cop for nearly 16 years now, and I've walked into some of the most horrifying situations imaginable. Shootings, murders, domestic disputes. The kind of things most people would never dream of seeing. But nothing prepared me for the case I called the apartment above the empty store. It started like any other routine call, a welfare check. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, about 8:30 p.m. I was finishing my shift and preparing to hit the streets for the last round of patrols when dispatch sent me to a small, mixed-use building downtown. The call came from a man named Harold, who owned a ground-floor store. He reported hearing strange noises above his shop for weeks, scratching, whispering, sometimes muffled screaming. But every time he investigated, the apartment seemed empty. He was getting scared, he said. The walls shook sometimes, doors creaked, footsteps passed overhead, and the landlord claimed there hadn't been a tenant in that apartment for over a year. I didn't think much of it. Buildings make noise. Pipes creak, sometimes rodents run in the walls. But I went anyway in standard procedure. The building itself was nondescript. A corner store with peeling paint and a few neon signs flickering weakly. The stairwell to the second-floor apartment smelled faintly of mildew and old dust. I knocked on the door. No answer. I rang the buzzer. Nothing, I called out. Silence. Decided to take a look through the mail slot. Nothing. The apartment appeared empty. From the small opening, just a dark hallway and shadows shifting in the corners. Radioed for backup just in case and went up the stairs. Each step groaned under my weight. Halfway up, I stopped. I could hear something, a faint tapping like fingernails on wood. It wasn't rhythmic, more like someone was testing the floorboards. I froze. "Police!" I called out. No answer. I drew my flashlight and slowly turned the doorknob. It was unlocked. Inside, the apartment was odd. It looked like someone had started moving in but never finished. The floorboards were bare in some places, and in others, a thin layer of dust covered everything. A mattress leaned against the wall. A few dishes were stacked in the sink, half-washed, and yet it felt lived in. Like someone had been there yesterday. I started calling her name. "Hello, anyone home?" Nothing. Then I noticed a series of markings along the wall. They weren't random scratches. They were numbers, dates, really. And they weren't recent. They spanned months, maybe years. Some of them were circled, others crossed out. It didn't make sense. The apartment had been officially vacant for over a year. I continued my search. Kitchen, bathroom, living area. Nothing unusual at first. But then I went into the bedroom. The room was small, dimly lit by the moonlight coming through a grimy window. And that's when I saw it. On the floor, written in what looked like pencil, were dozens of tiny stick figures all facing a corner of the room. Behind me, I thought I heard a whisper, soft, indistinct. I spun around, nothing. I chalked it up to nerves. Then the whisper came again. Clearer this time, leave. Don't look. I froze. My flashlight's beam swept across the floor, walls, and ceiling. Empty. Nothing. I took a step forward. A creak under my foot. Then the whisper again. I see you. That's when things got really strange. The door slammed behind me. Not gently, violently. The room went completely dark. My flashlight flickered once and then went out. I fumbled to turn it back on. When it came back, I could swear the stick figures on the floor had moved. Just slightly. Their heads turned toward me. I backed up. My hand went to my holster. Heart pounding, then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing across the room. No sound came from anywhere but the floorboards. I spun, sweeping the light, nothing. I called dispatch. Unit 12 to dispatch. I'm at the apartment above the store requesting immediate backup. Something's off. No response. Radio static. I decided I needed to get out. I reached for the door, but it wouldn't budge. I yanked again. Nothing. That's when I noticed the bedroom window. I ran to it, hoping to escape, but the glass was filthy and the frame warped. Even with all my strength, I couldn't open it. Then I heard it scratching. From the ceiling. The floor above? No, it's the top floor. It shouldn't even exist. The scratching became a rhythm, faster, like nails dragging over wood. Then came a low, guttural hum. I backed into the corner, flashlight shaking in my hands. Then the hum became a voice. Stay. Stay forever. Hours, or maybe minutes, I don't know, passed. Time felt broken. My heart raced and I couldn't stop sweating. My training screamed that something was wrong. But what? There was nobody there. Or was there? I remember trying to stay rational, telling myself it was an intruder, a homeless person, maybe a kid hiding. But the voice knew things it couldn't possibly know. My name, my badge number, even the name of my partner. And then the floorboard shifted under my feet. I stumbled. The flashlight fell, and when I picked it up, I swear the stick figures on the floor were standing now, tiny pencil arms raised as if pointing at me. Eventually, backup arrived. 2 patrol cars, lights flashing, sirens off. I don't even remember letting them in. I just recall stumbling to the door. When they entered, the apartment looked empty again. Just dusty floorboards, scattered dishes, and the faint smell of mildew. Nothing else, no stick figures, no markings, no whispering. Even the markings on the wall were gone, as if someone or something had erased them. We did a full investigation. The apartment had indeed been vacant for over a year. No tenants, no neighbors had seen anyone move in. Landlord confirmed nothing. No records of Jeremy or anyone being there. Yet the physical evidence remained. The small pencil drawings on the floor, the faint metallic smell, and the complete mental breakdown I experienced in those moments. I filed my report, but no one believed the psychological elements. They called it stress-induced hallucination. But I know what I experienced was real. Months later, I got a call. Another welfare check. Another vacant apartment. Same building. Different floor. Different story, same signs, whispered voices, weird markings, unnerving behavior. Another officer claimed the apartment was haunted, and they refused to enter. After that, I stopped responding to welfare calls in that building. I still patrol the downtown area, but I avoid that corner. Some nights, though, when the wind is right, I hear scratching from the ceiling above a shop long abandoned, and I swear I can hear a whisper calling my name. No murder, no assault, no death, just obsession, stalking, psychological terror, the kind that doesn't leave bruises but leaves your mind twisted. I've been on countless calls since then. I've seen blood, gore, and death, but nothing has ever unsettled me like apartment 213 above that empty store, because the thing that scared me most wasn't physical. It wasn't violence. It was the realization that someone or something had been watching, waiting and controlling reality itself, even if just for a few terrifying minutes. And that's the thing about psychological horror. It doesn't leave marks you can show in court. It leaves marks in your soul. I still wake up some nights and I feel that presence, that sense of being watched, that small faint scratching on the ceiling. And I know, somewhere in that building, the apartment is waiting for me. I've seen a lot in my career as a police officer, but some cases stick with you, not because of the blood or violence, but because of how profoundly wrong they felt. One of the most unsettling and frankly disturbing experiences I've ever had was what I now call the silent neighbor. It started with a routine noise complaint. It was a late Friday evening, around 11:30 p.m. I was on patrol in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the streets lined with small two-story houses. I had already dealt with a few minor disturbances that night, a barking dog, a neighbor dispute over a trash can, but nothing serious. Then dispatch sent me to a house on Meadow Lane. The call was simple. A woman named Mrs. Carver reported hearing strange sounds coming from her neighbor's house. Not typical noises, but a kind of low, constant humming, accompanied by occasional sharp bangs. She said it had been going on for days and was making her uneasy. I didn't think it was urgent, but standard procedure required a check. The house in question was nondescript. Cream-colored siding, dark shutters, a small porch. Everything looked normal from the outside. I knocked on the front door. No answer. I rang the bell. Still nothing. I called dispatch to ask if anyone else lived there. No response. That's when I noticed the windows. All of them were completely blacked out. Not curtains, not blinds, but some opaque material taped over the panes. I couldn't see inside. My gut told me something wasn't right. I radioed for backup just to be safe and started walking around the perimeter of the house. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper. "Come in." I froze. It was so soft I could barely make it out, but it was definitely a human voice. Not on the phone, not on a speaker. Right there outside the house, I called out, "This is the police." "Is anyone inside?" Silence. After a few tense minutes, I decided to approach the front door again. I noticed a faint outline of movement behind one of the blacked-out windows. Nothing definite, just a shadow. I knocked firmly. The door slowly creaked open. Nobody was there. I stepped inside, calling out, gun drawn. The house smelled strange, like damp wood mixed with an overpowering chemical odor. The living room was empty. No furniture had been moved, no signs of forced entry. Everything was meticulously clean, almost sterile. But there was something off. The humming came again faintly from upstairs. I climbed the stairs cautiously. Each step groaned beneath my weight. The hallway at the top was dark, lined with closed doors. I noticed a faint flicker from the last door on the right. The humming was louder now, more insistent. I tried to open the door. Locked. I knocked. "Police, open up!" No response. But I could hear movement inside. Slow, deliberate pacing like someone circling the room. I radioed into dispatch. Unit 14, possible occupant inside, unusual activity. Requesting immediate backup. Before I could finish, the door handle slowly turned. The door opened, revealing a dimly lit room. The room looked like a cross between an office and a shrine. The walls were lined with photographs of people I didn't recognize. Some were cut from newspapers, others printed from social media. All of them had red marks, X's drawn over their faces. On the desk sat a notebook. I picked it up carefully. Page after page, it was filled with names, addresses, and obsessive notes about their daily routines. I realized with a sickening shock that this person had been watching people for months, maybe years. Then I saw her. A young woman crouched in the corner of the room, wide-eyed, pale. She trembled. Her lips moved silently, as if praying. I stepped forward slowly. "Ma'am, are you okay?" "You're safe now," she didn't respond. Her eyes darted to the doorway behind me. I spun around. A man was there, middle-aged, unremarkable, wearing dark clothes, standing completely still. The hum stopped. The room went dead silent. "Police," I said, keeping my gun trained on him. He didn't move, didn't blink. Then he whispered, almost imperceptibly, "You shouldn't be here." That's when the full horror of the situation hit me. The man wasn't just watching people. He had been living like this for years, cataloging lives, planning, obsessing. The woman in the corner wasn't a random victim. She had been his neighbor, his silent neighbor. He had lured her into his home with subtle manipulation, trapping her psychologically before physically restraining her. Backup arrived just moments later. The man didn't resist. He quietly let himself be handcuffed. The woman collapsed, sobbing, and I tried to reassure her as paramedics took her to the hospital. During interrogation, the man revealed details that chilled me to my core. He had studied people like a scientist, studying specimens, learning their habits, predicting their moves. He had cameras hidden in walls and ceilings, meticulously documenting everything. He hadn't harmed them physically, at least not yet, but his psychological manipulation had been profound. Fear, control, isolation. He had a notebook of over 100 individuals he had monitored. Each page detailed their schedules, personal relationships, habits. Some pages included threats, some included instructions for how he would isolate them if he needed to. It was terrifying. Not just the act itself, but the methodical obsession, the level of premeditation. This wasn't a moment of madness. This was years of calculated psychological terror. The woman recovered, but she was deeply shaken. She refused to return to her apartment. She moved away, changed her phone number, and rarely spoke of the incident. I don't blame her. The man was charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, stalking, and psychological abuse. He's serving a long sentence now, but the case left a mark on me I can't shake. Sometimes when I walk my beat late at night, I think about the apartment, about the photographs, the notebooks, the quiet, methodical way he stalked his victims, and I realize that psychological horror is worse than physical violence in many ways. It leaves no scars you can see, no evidence to comfort you, only fear, paranoia, and the knowledge that someone could be watching, planning, waiting, silently. Even now, years later, I check my own apartment windows at night. I triple lock the doors. I look over my shoulder, because I know there are people out there like him. Silent neighbors, hidden in plain sight, waiting to turn someone else's life into a nightmare. And as a cop, the worst part is that there's nothing you can do until it's too late.